We're about ready to get started here. First of all, I would like to thank you all for being here. This is an important moment in Philadelphia's effort for criminal justice reform. For over a year, we have been saying that this is about science, this is about facts, this is about data, and that for too long, the media coverage around criminal justice has not been given the information they needed to understand when policies work and when they don't work. For too long, what the media has had available is a terrible story, a true story, but a terrible story about something that happened to an individual. And that is how you get to a situation where for 30 years, crime has gone down, and yet for 30 years, 65% of the U.S. population believed every single year that crime was going up. Today, we are here to discuss a couple of reports. One is this: Prosecutor-Led Bail Reform Year 1, which was prepared by the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office. Another is an independent academic report which was done separate and apart from our office. As you will soon hear, these reports come to the same conclusion, and that conclusion is good news. Before I begin, I would like to introduce those who are up here with me. We have Philadelphia Mayor Jim Kenney, who's been an essential partner in what we are doing in terms of criminal justice reform. We have Angela Barnes, whose husband was detained and suffered because of old bail policies that have now been changed. We are blessed to have a number of members of City Council here with us. We have Councilman Curtis Jones, Councilman Derek Green. We have Councilwoman Janie Blackwell. And did I miss anyone? Did I get all my council people? Well, if more show up, we will introduce them as well. Very importantly, we have Keir Bradford Gray, who is our chief defender at the Defender Association of Philadelphia, and many of whose interesting, innovative policies in her office are supportive of the DA's efforts, just as our efforts are in many ways supportive of her very interesting and forward-looking policies. We also have with us Aurelie Oos, who is an assistant professor of criminology at the University of Pennsylvania. She is one of the co-authors of the independent report that we're going to talk about today. Megan Stevenson, who is not present, assisted in that report. She is an assistant professor of law at George Mason University. She is the co-author, but she could not join us here today. We also have Joshua Glenn of the Youth Art and Self-Empowerment Project, and frankly, another 15 people that I could recognize, but the reality is I would forget one. So I'm going to stop with that series of introductions. 1 year ago, my office and its team of hardworking researchers, prosecutors, and policy staff members rolled out our current no-cash bail policy for low-level offenses. Today, I'm pleased to say that not only is it working as designed, but a team of highly qualified scholars took a look at what we are doing here in the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office, and they looked at mountains of data, and they agree. Changing our low-level bail policy was the right and fair thing to do for the poor, for people of color, and everyone in Philadelphia's criminal justice system, because what we had a year ago was not fair. We should not imprison people for poverty. We will hear in a moment Angela Barnes, just one person who can tell you about her husband's experience with a bail policy that used to let out everybody who had a job and everybody who had a couple dollars, but kept people in jail simply for being poor when they were charged with the very same offense. That experience, the experience of people in my office who had been in criminal justice for a very long time, and also independent information from other jurisdictions where the elimination of cash bail was so successful, for example, Washington, D.C., led us to a process by which we came down with a new policy. This policy also saves taxpayers money because it allows low-level defendants to maintain their lives, their freedom, and their employment. To make sure that District Attorney Office's cash bail policy was targeting the right defendants with the desired outcomes, Aurelie Oos, Assistant Professor of Criminology at the University of Pennsylvania, and Megan Stevenson, Assistant Professor of Law at George Mason University, performed an independent evaluation, and they found that our new policy did not produce, quote, detectable evidence that the decreased use of monetary bail, unsecured bond, and release on conditions had adverse effects on appearance rates or recidivism, unquote. Simply put, the new policies didn't have a significant impact on the number of people who go to court, and it didn't cause defendants to commit more crimes, and it helped to preserve and not to tear apart the lives of those defendants who are poor or people of color. And when you don't tear apart people's lives, and when you keep them in contact with the things that keep them on course, they are less likely to commit crimes in the future. They also found that there was not a statistically significant change in the number of defendants released on their recognizance successfully showing up for court as compared to those released during the previous administration. They found that defendants released on their recognizance were not rearrested more often when compared to those released during the previous administration. And they found that over the past 10 months, by which I mean from February to the end of December 2018, about 1,700 fewer defendants were sent to jail before their first hearing. Let me say that again. 1,700 fewer people went to jail before their first hearing as a consequence of this policy. There was an immediate 23% increase in the number of eligible defendants who were released on their own recognizance without any monetary bail or with other supervisory conditions. There was a 41% decline in bail amounts of $5,000 or less. And let's remember, in Philadelphia, $5,000 bail amount ordinarily means you got to pay $500, right? So we saw a big reduction in these very low bails, which, as you know, under the policy, were really only being applied to nonviolent offenses and offenses that were not sex offenses. A 5% decline in eligible defendants who spent at least one night in jail was also observed. Now, I'd like to thank Professors Oos and Stevenson, the hardworking team in my office, and our criminal justice partners for their support and their partnership this past year. Professor Oos, thank you for joining us today, and please pass on our thanks to your colleague, Professor Stevenson, who could not join us. Mr. Mayor, thank you for your help, support, and leadership in this and so many other members, Councilman Jones and the entire City Council, including Councilman Green and Councilwoman Blackwell. You have been so supportive and given us the support we need to make this progress. Additionally, I would like to thank our MacArthur partners for their assistance in making criminal justice reform an important priority in their respective areas and throughout the city. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Mayor Jim Kenney, a true supporter and advocate for criminal justice reform and fairness, to speak. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank District Attorney Krasner for including me in today's event. I also want to thank all of our criminal justice and community partners who are working tirelessly to reform our system so that it is just and fair for all. We're in a pivotal moment of justice reform in this city and this country. Reform efforts like ours have taken hold in communities across the country, and we are leading the way. I'm investing in our communities rather than costly incarceration. These investments will make us safer and help our city thrive. Criminal justice reform has been and remains a cornerstone of our administration's goal of promoting healthy and safe communities across Philadelphia. Back in 2015, Philadelphia embarked on a collaborative and data-driven reform effort to safely reduce the size of our jail population and reduce the rate of racial, ethnic, and economic disparities in our criminal justice system. With the generous support of the MacArthur Foundation's Safety and Justice Challenge, we were able to develop an ambitious reform plan to cut our bail population by 50% over 5 years from 2015 to 2020. As of today, we have decreased our jail population by 43% since 2015, and we are not stopping there. We even fully depopulated one of our oldest and largest correctional facilities, the House of Correction, also known as the Creek, because there was no longer a need to house people there. Yep. We are continuing the difficult and important work of reform every day, and bail reform is a crucial part of these efforts. We have been able to make change happen because of real and meaningful collaboration among partner agencies, not just the District Attorney's Office, but also the 1st Judicial District, Public Defender's Office, the Police Department, the Department of Prisons, the city's behavioral health system, and our City Council. We thank all of our partners for their diligence and continued commitment to this cause. When we started the reform effort, we recognized that too many people were being held in jail pre-trial who did not need to be there, and some people were being held simply because they could not afford to pay the cost of their bail. The impact was greatest on low-income communities and communities of color. All the criminal justice partners recognized that our policies and practices needed to change to address the inequities, that we could not stand for the status quo. So we have strengthened our efforts to safely divert individuals away from the criminal justice system, and everyone has a part to play. We expanded the options for law enforcement in responding to individuals who commit low-level crime, especially when it's driven by mental illness or substance abuse, when treatment is a better option for them than incarceration. The district attorney implemented progressive bail policies 1 year ago. This is a critical step in moving away from the use of cash bail in Philadelphia. The Early Bail Review Program, launched under the leadership of Municipal Court, provides a second layer of review for people being held on low amounts of bail who can be considered for release. And the Public Defender's Office has stationed pretrial advocates at the police district to interview individuals earlier in the process and advocate for release at a bail hearing. They, along with pretrial services, offer support to help ensure that people appear at their court date. Last year, community members raised the issue of that 30% of the money posted for bail was being retained by the city as a fee. Through advocacy from the public and under the leadership of the 1st Judicial District and City Council, we have eliminated that fee altogether. Now all the money is returned once an individual appears at their court date. These programs and the DA's bail policies are important components of our pretrial reform, moving us towards our ultimate goal of eliminating cash bail in the County of Philadelphia. The progress we have made is to be celebrated, but we also cannot lose sight of the challenges we have yet to overcome. People of color still remain highly overrepresented in our criminal justice system. While we have seen substantial reductions in our jails and implemented critical pretrial reforms, the rate of racial and ethnic disparities in the system has remained the same. And people of color are disproportionately impacted by our cash bail system. We haven't been able to move the needle in reducing disparities. We need to do better. But we are working tirelessly to change that and to break the cycle of poverty and incarceration that impacts so many of our citizens. I want to thank the District Attorney for his groundbreaking work in this. I want to thank the people who are assembled here for continuing to push, Reverend, for continuing to push us in the right direction. We will ultimately get there and have a more honest, open, and balanced criminal justice system in our city. So thank you all for coming.
Too often when a study is released, people end up swimming in a sea of numbers, and it has meaning. It appeals to the head, but it doesn't really always appeal to the heart. And that's why it's so important to see the face of what these issues can mean in the lives of individuals. I would like to invite Angela Barnes to come forward and say a few words about her husband, who was detained and suffered because of the old bail policy. Ms. Barnes?
When I first heard that the DA's office would no longer ask for cash bail in order for persons charged with certain low-level crimes to be released from prison, it really touched home for me. I thought about how different things would have been for my husband had this been in effect years ago. My husband was arrested and charged with possession of marijuana, 4 bags, with the intent to deliver. A bail was imposed in order for him to be released from prison. Unfortunately, though, he didn't have the means to pay bail, so he spent 10 days in prison for a charge. And as a result, the work that he was able to secure at the time, he lost. In addition, because he didn't have time, a clean background, or enough time with his defense team, he felt compelled to take a plea deal. And the plea came with 3 years of report and probation, tons of court costs, and a loss of his driving privileges, which he wasn't made aware of before he took the deal. It made finding work, meaningful work, nearly impossible for him. And every time he took a few steps forward in the right direction, he was knocked back down. It was as if a dark cloud wouldn't go away. Being a man that loves to provide for his family, at times I could see it was completely affecting him. I watched him go in and out of depression, and I could see it affecting his self-esteem, particularly, though, when he applied for a SEPTA job and he was called in to take the test. He passed it, then got a call later to come in and interview, and then was offered the job. He was really excited, but that excitement quickly faded when he received a call that they couldn't move forward because he was on active probation. Had my husband had the means, like others who were charged with similar crimes, his outcome and chance to bounce back after being charged or even making mistakes would be completely different. I know and believe that. We are all imperfect and we all make mistakes. And not only those with means and those with money deserve a chance to move forward and get up from under that dark cloud that tends to follow those without the means to fight back. Being poor and getting into any type of trouble could very well mean an end to any possible success in his life. I'm glad I'm able to share my husband's story, because I wasn't always on this side of the issues, and I wasn't always able to see it through the eyes that I do now. I felt like some of you may feel today, which I know now isn't right. Life has a way of teaching us and adjusting our views, and I'm glad it did for me. So that's why I support these important reforms from DA Krasner, and I hope that the whole city can get on board and help people come home pre-trial.
I would now like to invite Councilman Curtis Jones, whose career is an example of leadership around criminal justice, to come forward and say a few prepared remarks. But I'd also like to invite his city council colleagues to come forward and stand with us, and if they wish to offer a couple comments after the councilman, to do so.
Thank you. Thank you.
In city council, you can do nothing by yourself. We work with a majority of 9 and often 12. I stand here with my colleague, Councilwoman Blackwell, who was a part of the original Ban the Box legislation that we put forward, and also Councilman Derek Green, who talked about alternatives to bail and also how to get people out with a fund that would be supplied. So I wanted them to be with me. But we're here to talk about a leader, and keep in mind, he didn't invent justice reform. We've had, along with Keir Gray, the Criminal Justice Reform Committee, and no disrespect to defense attorney, you guys, you know, you are loving individuals by your DNA. But when a district attorney realizes that cash bail is an impediment to justice, that is a statement that is leadership. And I appreciate coming here today and thanking you for that. I want to also say that the Close the Creek Coalition, the No Cash Bail 215, we took a long ride to DC where we discovered that there was no cash bail for 20 years in Washington, DC. And closer, we held hearings in city council and found out that even New Jersey, and they're not supposed to lead us in anything, has not had a cash bail system for a year. So when our district attorney decided to make this one of his cornerstones in building a justice system in this city, it was the tipping point that made all these stakeholders come together. And we want to thank you for it. The young lady that talked about her husband, how lives are, you know, statistics, as the district attorney said, you know, we get analysis paralysis. We dive into statistics and we forget the human cost of what bad systems do to people. You get arrested, you lose a job, you lose a home, you lose a wife, you lose hope, and then you become caught up in the system. That's what cash bail can do. We went up to the prison. We met with over a dozen inmates, and some of them were in there for $100. And because of the issue, their families did not want to get them out. What a waste of time, what a waste of talent. And finally, we have a district attorney, that has the courage to take on this issue. Thank you, DA Krasner.
Thank you very much, as always. I first thank God for the privilege of seeing another day and the pleasure to be with all of you. Let me thank our mayor. Let me thank this wonderful family and let them know we are here for you in any way we can be. God bless you. And let me thank our DA. I've been around a very long time. I'm running again, but I've been around a very long time, and I am proud. This DA has taken us further than any I've ever known. And we are proud to stand here with him, proud of his leadership, and proud that he's not afraid to stand with poor people, with minority people, with incarcerated people. We heard everything he said when he ran, and we're proud to stand with him now as he has made those things he advocated for reality. I want to thank my colleagues here, and many who are not here certainly stand with us and believe in this. We're happy to be here. Thank you all.
I just want to join my colleagues and thank both the mayor and our district attorney for taking a substantial step in reducing the issue of cash bail in our city. We need to get to a point where we no longer have cash bail. When I listened to the young lady's testimony about her husband, it reminded me about the hearings we had regarding the cash bail funds that Councilman Jones talked about. And we heard similar stories of people who were losing jobs because of being incarcerated but not being able to be released because they did not have the funds to afford bail. So this is not just a criminal justice reform issue, but it's an economic justice issue. When people are losing jobs and we have such a high rate of poverty here in the city of Philadelphia, and by having this type of cash bail system, it does not allow us to address poverty. But also, and I'll close with this, it's also a civil rights issue. As a former assistant district attorney, I was also a deputy attorney general in Delaware. When someone's been arrested, they've been charged with a crime. They have not been proven guilty, they've been charged with a crime. And so we have people who are in our jails who've been charged with a crime, are staying there for a period of time just because they can't afford to be let go. And so that is a civil rights issue that we need to address. That's why we need to get rid of cash bail. That's why I'm glad that our district attorney is taking leadership on this issue, along with the mayor, member of the city council, and our public defender, to make sure we'll get one step closer to ending cash bail in the city of Philadelphia. Thank you.
And now I'd like to invite Keir Bradford Gray, who is our Chief Defender of the Defender Association of Philadelphia, to come forward. In Philadelphia, we're in uncharted territory to some extent. There has not always been such a complementary relationship between prosecutors and defense attorneys, but I have to tell you, I have experienced what I consider not only a complementary relationship, but a real synergy when it comes to doing the kinds of things that don't just get people out of jail, but get them to come back to court, and don't just get people out of jail, but get them not to be arrested again. And I know that Chief Defender Bradford Gray's very innovative policies around this have played a crucial role, and I'm grateful to her for it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. One, this is an amazing day. This is an amazing time to be here. Criminal justice reform has been talked about, but Philadelphia is on fire. And as an insider in this court, I've seen a lot of things. What I've seen in this city since 2015 is nothing short of a miracle. Let's just start with, for one, we have a mayor that came out on top of this issue, these very issues, in 2015, before the appetite began to salivate, and said, I stand with people who are being oppressed, who are being unnecessarily incarcerated. I believe that it's something that can help our city to improve the qualities of their lives. Then we had City Council, led by Council President Darrell Clark, co-chaired by Councilman Curtis Jones, who reformed or formulated a committee designed to look at areas of our system that is unnecessarily oppressing people, making them more desperate, that is making unnecessary burdens on taxpayers, and not promoting public safety. We did a lot of things, and we looked at great models, and we figured out what was going on here. Then we had a rising bubbling of leadership from our community that had been coming forth, not only pushing our elected officials, pushing us as public defenders, pushing the district attorneys, electing or helping to elect another district attorney. They deserve so much credit because what they've been doing in helping facilitate this action, I've never seen before, and I can't thank them enough. Of course, I have to thank District Attorney Krasner for stepping out ahead of this and making sure that these are something that you're not afraid of because you believe in it. And then lastly, I would be remiss, I cannot not thank the men and women of the Public Defender's Office who have changed their structures, changed their beliefs, changed their understanding of what we can do to help facilitate this. We went out into the communities, and we not only wanted to occupy space in the community, we wanted to be a part of the fabric of the community. So we started collaborating with them so much more and so much more strategically that we have allowed so many great things to go on that allow for the policies that have happened so people show up to court at, 90% of a rate. And we're doing this without a risk assessment. We're doing this with human assessment, human nature, and human capacity. That's how you change outcomes, not by an algorithm or not by just a policy. It is a shared understanding, and it is a shared practice, and we have to keep moving. But let me give you some of the things that help complete some of the narrative of what's going on here in Philadelphia. With the rising of the community bail funds, we've been able to get people released like never before. But also, they've been providing those gaps that people can't see. Because when people get released from custody, they still have social issues they have to deal with. They still have things that may block them from getting to court. And those people are providing transportation, they're providing housing, they're providing opportunities. The Defender Association also created a client-centered model, which is aimed at making sure that people are seen as humans. The Defenders Association's Bail Advocate Program is something that we've never had before. And I don't know if any of you ever understood what happens at a preliminary arraignment where you determine whether or not one should be in or out, but it is something that is one of the less humanizing process points that a major decision is being made, whether or not someone should be incarcerated or released. We can't even talk to a person to figure out who they are before making that decision. We have information on a piece of paper, which is about 10% of what we're going to decide on. The bail advocates have provided us more information to have a complete picture, and that was done under the MacArthur Grant, and I appreciate that. But we need to go further, and we need to spread this further. The Defender Association also hired a bail navigator to compound the work that the community bail funds have been doing. And LaTanya Myers has been amazing with this. She's been counseling and connecting clients that are released pre-trial, connecting them with job opportunities, identification, housing, and other supports in coordination with the community bail funds. The Defender Adult Social Service Team works with pretrial clients to connect them with addiction treatment, mental health services, and other community-based supports to address underlying issues related to the case in hopes that good DAs that we have now will see who needs to be in this process and who doesn't. We can shrink this system if we make better decisions on the front end. The Defender Association created a text messaging reminder program that informs clients of their next dates, but also gets information about whether or not they're having complications showing up to court, so we can avoid unnecessary failures to appear. And then, the defender attorneys routinely seek bail reductions through the criminal justice process. We routinely make sure that the advocacy stays strong on this issue. And we could not be remiss but to include our NFL team. They also understand the value of making sure that people are treated fairly and people are individualized on that front end. The only way we're really going to make a dent in racial disparity is if we get rid of cash. Cash should never be a determination of whether or not someone should be in or out. It should be an individualized assessment. We should be able to make a motion and figure out who needs to be in this system and who doesn't. And we can't do that by a blanket policy in cash. So I'm looking forward to pushing, what Larry is doing, but pushing even further to making us a no-cash bail system. Our sister states, New Jersey and Delaware, are there. Pennsylvania can go there. We just need to make sure that we have the right leadership in the right place. But one thing for sure is I am proud to be here in Philadelphia with all the men and women that are helping make this possible. Thank you so much.
Thank you to our Chief Defender. And now I'd like to introduce Orly Oos, the Assistant Professor of Criminology at the University of Pennsylvania, who is one of the co-authors of the independent report we are going to be talking about today. Ms. Oos?
Great. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about this work with Megan Stevenson. As a little bit of background, both Megan Stevenson and myself are empirical researchers who have been working over the past years on bail reform. Megan Stevenson has worked on pretrial risk assessments. I have, as an example, conducted a large study in New York City showing that text message reminders can drastically reduce failures to appear in court. So very happy to hear that this is something that's implemented here in Philadelphia as well. So the Philadelphia reform announced last year is one among many efforts across the country to reduce reliance on cash bail. But the effect that this policy has on people's behaviors is still up to debate. Pro-reformers say that it will reduce inequalities and reduce reliance on jail, whereas skeptics are worried that with no monetary skin in the game, defendants are more likely to both fail to appear in court and to commit new offenses. There's little empirical evidence to figure out, who's right to what extent, and this is the gap that Megan Stevenson and I decided to fill out by taking the opportunity of this reform that happened last year to understand what concretely happened after this policy was in place, after reliance on cash bail went down. So we asked two sets of questions. First, what happens to failures to appear and to crime and violent crime, which are the big things that opponents to these policies are worried about. And second, kind of specific to the Philadelphia context, this is unique in the sense that this is a policy that was implemented by a district attorney's office, and it's a bail commissioner who chooses bail amounts. And so we also wanted to ask, is this going to have an effect at all on decisions that are made? So just to go directly to our results, which were foreshadowed earlier, we find that yes, after this policy, there was an immediate increase in release in own recognizance rates, a 23% increase, which is sizable, and also a decrease in the fraction of defendants who are going to spend one night in jail. We don't find anything for longer stays in jail, but a reduction in defendants spending one night in jail. So when I think about what this policy concretely did for defendants, the big thing that it did is that it changed the conditions of release for defendants in Philadelphia. Concretely, more defendants were out of jail without not owing any money. So they no longer had this monetary incentive to show up to their court date. How did this affect their offending and their failures to appear? We find no detectable effect on failures to appear, on violent offending, or on just plain recidivism 4 months after a person's initial court dates. So to give you a little bit of background on how we reached these conclusions, first to tell you about the data we used administrative court data, so we're looking at actual court records for defendants. What we really think our value added was to try and isolate the effect of this particular policy among the large scope of what was happening in the Philadelphia context. This was not an isolated policy, and so what we tried to do is try to answer the question, what is the contribution of the no cash bail reform on the trends in offending and incarceration that we're seeing here in Philadelphia? We do that in two main ways. First, we focus on a very narrow time window just before and after the policy was put in place, recognizing that there were a lot of things happening with the new administration and with other actors in the criminal justice space in Philadelphia. If we focus on a few days, a few weeks around February 21st, 2018, this was really the big thing that was happening. Second, we talked about the fact that this policy was for non-serious, non-violent offenses, and so we also compared trends in failures to appear and recidivism for defendants who are charged with more serious offenses to account for things like seasonality and other changes happening at the same time in the Philadelphia system. And both methodologies just yield similar results. It was eligible offenses who had an increase in ROR, release on your own recognizance, and no effect on failures to appear on crime. So these results are really important for Philadelphia, but we're really encouraged as we see this informing the national debates on bail reform. We see this work as providing some of the first evidence that there are ways to reduce cash bail without concerns for public safety or court compliance. So now I'm going to finish by thinking a little bit about, as we want to think about these policies in the scope of the national debates, A few caveats as we're thinking about scaling. First, our study is just for nonviolent offenses who were the defendants who were eligible for this particular reform. The other thing that I want to, so we can't say what would happen if this policy was scaled more broadly. The second thing I want to highlight is that before the reform, 50% of defendants with eligible offenses were already getting released on their own recognizance. Not 100%, but still there was a sizable fraction of people who were being released on their own recognizance. Furthermore, about a quarter of them were spending at least one night in jail, and I don't want to minimize what it means for this quarter of people to be spending a night in jail, but as we're thinking about what can contribute to the decrease in the jail population overall, it doesn't seem like this was a main contributor, and it looks like we should look at other policies that were happening at the same time that can explain the decrease in the jail population. And then lastly, note that the release on the own recognizance rate increased, but it didn't go to 100%. And this is the next step in our own research, is to try to understand who among eligible defendants were getting ROR or were not getting it, try to understand who specifically are we talking about when we're thinking about this reform. So what have we learned? It's a common belief that people need monetary skin in the game to comply with court conditions. This is really the core of the reason why monetary bail exists in the first place. And we find that this is not the case, at least for nonviolent offenses. So this reform, as applied to nonviolent offenders, probably is not what can explain the decrease in the jail population, but very importantly, it decreased the financial strains of the court system on people's lives. So that is really the big important takeaway for us with this policy. So we're very excited to continue this research and understand better whether it can be scaled to other types of offenses or to more defendants with nonviolent offenses without jeopardizing public safety. Thank you.
Thank you to Professor Oos. And finally, last but not least, I'd like to introduce Joshua Glenn from the Youth Art and Self-Empowerment Project to deliver some remarks. Mr. Glenn?
So hi, my name is Joshua Glenn. I'm the co-founder / co-director of the Youth Art Self-Empowerment Project. We're a youth-led organization that goes into the Philadelphia adult jails. We do art and poetry workshops every weekend with the young men and women that are locked up and charged as adults. We also have a campaign to repeal Act 33. Act 33 is the law that allows youth to be automatically charged as adults and held in adult prisons pre-trial. And so we've been doing a lot of work for a few years on trying to change the law and repeal the law because we don't think no young people should be charged as adults and held in adult prisons pre-trial. I'm also a member of the Coalition for a Just DA, which is a coalition that formulated a year before Larry Krasner got elected so that we can hold the next district attorney accountable for the policies that impact our communities in a bad way. And so, you know, a year before he got in office, we came together as a community and we tried to come up with solutions to hold the next DA accountable. And now we have this platform so that we can work with the district attorney to make changes in these systems that have been impacting our people in a bad way. I'm also a member of the No 215 Jail Coalition, which is a coalition that has been working to end cash bail in Philadelphia, and we also are the coalition that took the trip to D.C. with Representative Curtis Jones, and basically we met with the city council, we met with everybody in D.C. and they told us about their system, and then we tried to make those adjustments here so that we can have a better system for Philadelphia. The reforms that we see the DA Larry Krasner doing, they're really great. You know, they've been really impactful for our communities, and we just know there's a lot more work to be done. There are still people being targeted in our communities. There's still people being systematically funneled. There's still young people that are held in adult prisons. And so, you know, we know that he's definitely on our side, and he's really taken a key role in being a leader and in doing these great reforms. But, you know, we want to make sure that we urge the city and urge all the stakeholders in Philadelphia to push it to the next level. You know, we have to take the lead and be the conductors of this train to change how people are being hurt in our communities and in Philadelphia. And so we need to be the ones that take the lead and show the rest of the country that we have the strength, we have the power, and we have the nerve and the strength to just take the lead. And I think that we are in the right hands when it comes to District Attorney Larry Krasner. And I also want to thank Kier Bradford Gray for, creating the participatory defense hubs. I mean, this has really energized our communities, and it really brings our communities together in a way that now we're building leaders. The people that these systems said couldn't be redeemed or reformed, now they're becoming the leaders that are really changing communities, and they are using their expertise, and their expertise is being people that came through these systems. They're using that to empower other people that are coming through these systems to do better. And so we want to thank Kier Bradford Gray. We want to thank DA Krasner. And I really want to talk about solutions. For me, I'm a person that also went through this system, and I've done a lot of work on trying to figure out what can we do as a city to make our city better and safe. And the only thing we can do as a city is figure out solutions and programs that address the root causes to why people are committing crime. And we have to invest in people that are coming out of jail. And I think that we're on the road to doing that. So I want to thank everybody in the city that has been involved in this process. And I hope we can continue to make more progress as a city. Thank you.
I don't know that anybody could have done a better job of bringing us back to the point, which is that this is in fact a movement, that it is not coming from any one individual. It is in fact coming from community groups and people who wear different hats within the system itself. And I think Mr. Glenn did an amazing job of pointing that out. We may be the technicians, but we are technicians for a movement. At this time, we'll be happy to take any media questions that are about this topic. After we conclude this press conference, if there are any questions about other topics, we will address them in one way or another in the hallway here. But are there any questions on this topic, the topic of bail reform 1.0 in Philly? You do not have copies of the study? Do we have copies? We did bring some copies, and we'll be happy to provide it to you, yes.
We've seen our representatives from police, and some critics say some of your policies, maybe not totally the low-level crimes, but some of your overall thinking contributing to the increase in homicides. What do you say to those critics, and why aren't police?
Police are not here simply because they're not involved in the bail process. The bail process is one in which the district attorney's office brings charges, and the district attorney's office recommends a bail, and then it is decided by a judge or a bail commissioner with input, of course, an argument from the defender or from a private defense attorney. It's not that we want to exclude them. In fact, I was communicating with the commissioner just this morning about a variety of matters, which I often do. As for my critics, I'd like to see their report. It's easy to criticize. It's nice to have some facts. And so I encourage them to come forward with whatever facts they may have that might show that we're doing something that could be done better. We do not consider this to be written in stone. As I said, this is bail reform 1.0. There's going to be a 2.0. There's going to be a 3.0. But what we're not going to do is engage in conversations with people who are making stuff up, pulling it out of their back pocket, and have absolutely no facts to support it. To what do I attribute the rise in homicides? I think the police commissioner and I agree on that. If you look at the causes of homicide in 2017 to 2018, what you'll see is the number of drug-related homicides went from 60 in 2017 to about 121 in 2018. And needless to say, that's consistent with the fact that we're in the middle of an opioid epidemic. It's a real serious issue. If you look at the other motivations listed, whether it's, a domestic situation or some sort of disrespect or a robbery resulting in death, they all remain fairly stationary. So I think that the causation itself is quite clear. I also think, though, it is fair to say, when you talk about the rise in homicides, you mean from last year, because in fact we are in the 5th consecutive year of rises in homicides. And 4 of those years were years when the policies being followed were very different than the policies we are following now. And I think it is further useful to put it in context that the total level of violent crime in Philadelphia last year reduced 5%. Reduced 5%. So this is why I say science is good, and the full context is important, and we hope, as a DA's office, to be able to do something that, frankly, my predecessors didn't do, which is bring you criminological facts, bring you stuff that you can use so we can see the trends and not just play into, frankly, the usual narrative. And I'm not suggesting you're doing this at all, but play into the usual narrative, which is there's a bad thing over there, be afraid. Well, there is a bad thing happening over there, and it's extremely important that we address it. But we have to view everything in context. Facts are good, science good.
So is 2.0 elimination cash bail for low-level offenders?
2.0 is not done yet. There is no specific plan yet, but I can tell you that it will be based in part on a lot of the data that we have here. If it looks like there are particular offenses that perhaps should not be included in this list of 25, we might pull them. If there are other offenses that look that they might be appropriate for including in our presumption of no cash bail, they may be added. I think there's a long-term goal, and the public defender has raised an issue with me that I think is very, very interesting of another way to do this, and perhaps that's 2.0, maybe that's 3.0, but that is a work in progress, simply put. Yes?
Initially, this was announced by a 4,000 individuals, and it looks like it's fewer than 2,000. How do you get bail magistrates to agree to no bail for more felony?
So, bail magistrates, or in Philadelphia we call them bail commissioners, they have their own realm of power. And the reality is that in the vast majority of cases, they were willing to listen to our recommendations for these types of offenses. I think that the way that we can get them to follow our recommendations is to show them this report and to show them that they were not endangering the public when they did this. Let's not forget where we were when this started. We were being told, number one, this is going to have the city on fire. There's going to be a zombie invasion. If you're going to let these people out, oh my goodness, they're going to run in your front door and take your loved ones out the back. No, that didn't happen. And the second thing was, oh my God, if you don't make them pay $250, why would they ever go to court? No, that didn't happen, right? So when you're able to go back to these bail commissioners who, have lived in a culture where people said stuff like that and say, ha ha ha, look at what the facts are, I think that is helpful when we go back and say, here's our bail 2.0. We're hitting the ball pretty hard so far. Can we take another couple swings? I would like to end cash bail in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And a lot of right-thinking legislators would too. They just happen not to be the Republican majority who gerrymandered their way into power. But, what we have going on in Philadelphia is an example of what they refer to as progressive federalism, meaning there are things that can be done in progressive locations like major cities, and many of them are progressive, that serve as experiments, that serve as a way of demonstrating to the rest of the state that this system works. No, I can't necessarily shake those legislators from their economic attachment to people who make money in the bail bonds industry. But I am hopeful that just as in Kentucky, just as in New Jersey, just as 30 years ago in Washington, D.C., we might get to the point where it is illegal to use cash as an aspect of bail. Of course, what that really means, Mr. Thompson, is that if you look at D.C., 12% of the people are locked up, and there's no amount of money that they can pay to get out. They're staying in there. If, a billionaire gets locked up, he's staying in there if the offense meets certain criteria of violence or unlikeliness to show up for court, and the other 88% are getting out. And what we see over 30 years of data in D.C. is very much like what we see here. It does not cause a bunch of violent recidivism. It does not cause a bunch of recidivism, and people show up for court. I would hope to have a system that looks very much like D.C., so I guess the answer to that is yes. There may be some legal specifics that make it so it's not exactly a no cash bail system, because in general there is a right to have bail. But if that bail looks like $5 million on the one hand and nothing on the other hand, or $10 million on the one hand and nothing on the other hand, it's effectively the same system. So, I don't want to buy into the language exactly, but yes, I buy into the idea. We'd like to do that. Well, I think I'd look a little more carefully at that. Needless to say, statistics can always be stacked funny ways, so you can make a small difference sound like a big one. If you look at the, I assume you're looking at page 8. Page 8 looks at two things. It looks at recidivism rates before and after the policy, and what it shows for recidivism rate is actually a decrease. It shows that for misdemeanors, we went from 13% recidivism to 12%, and for pre-policy and post-policy, for felonies, you went from 19% pre-policy to 17% post-policy. The reason that the independent study has concluded that this policy did not increase FTAs is, among other things, if you look to the right of that graph, you will see that every year since 2014, failures to appear have been increasing year after year. And so we're not saying that this policy will stop an increase in FTAs that's been going on 5 years. What the independent analyst is saying is that this policy did not cause that increase. Now, when we look at the FTA rate, it is actually an interesting question as to why that's there, and we are working on a few possibilities. One possibility is we found that the court system under this administration is moving much more quickly, right? And that is partly probably the result of bringing fewer cases. It's the result of the fact that more cases are diverting and resolving. But the point I'm getting at is if in a period of a couple of months you have 6 court listings instead of moving at the slow pace previous of 3, then you're going to see an increase in failure to appear simply because there are more court dates to go to. It is possible that has something to do with it. It is also possible, frankly, that all of these increases since 2014 have something to do with our opioid epidemic. Addiction to drugs doesn't necessarily make you punctual, right? But I think it's important for people to understand that these FTAs do not mean that people didn't go to court and never came back. What they mean is they missed court one time. Anybody in the system knows that frequently people turn themselves in within 2 days. Frequently, they will turn themselves in within a week or 2 weeks. And we have another positive piece of data, not in this report, but worth noting. What we have found, despite this 5-year sequence of increases in FTAs, is our felony cases at the beginning of last year were resolving on average in 220 days. They are now resolving in 175 days. Those are felony cases, does not include homicides, right? That is a reflection of how much more efficiently and quickly the system is moving. And when the system moves in that fashion, it means the FTAs are not slowing down resolution of the case, and it also supports the argument that the FTAs may be related simply to having 2-week continuance dates instead of 4-week continuance dates. But to be as transparent as I possibly can, I can't tell you for sure what that's about. I can't tell you for sure why it's been going up for 4 or 5 years, but what I can tell you is that the independent analysts do not believe that people who were released in these 25 categories have caused the spike in FTAs. Are there any other questions? All right. If there are questions unrelated to this topic, then Mr. Waxman over here is our resource. Thank you.